It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind of quiet day that hums with ghosts of memories. The rain had been falling since morning, a soft drizzle tapping against my bedroom window like an old friend reminding me of time gone by. I'd decided to clean my closet not because it needed cleaning, but because sometimes I try to distract myself from the silence that fills this old house. Ever since Henry passed, the walls echo differently, and every creak feels like a whisper from the past. I started with the shelves near the top, where I keep things I rarely touch, winter scarves, a few boxes of photographs, and a cedar chest my mother gave me when I got married. It smelled faintly of lavender and age. I pulled it forward, brushing off the thin layer of dust that had gathered around it, and as I did, something fluttered from behind a folded envelope, yellowed at the edges, slipped down like a falling leaf. I almost ignored it. Probably an old bill or receipt, I thought. But something about the way it had been tucked so precisely behind the chest, not inside, it made me pause. The envelope had no stamp, no address, just a single word written in delicate, shaky cursive. Evelyn, my name. I froze, staring at those letters. The ink had faded, but the pen strokes were unmistakably familiar. It was Henry's handwriting, my husband's. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Henry had been gone nearly 12 years, but seeing his handwriting again, it was like hearing his voice echo from the other side. I sat on the floor, cross-legged like a child, and turned the envelope over. The seal was unbroken. For a long moment, I just stared at it, afraid to open it, afraid of what might lie inside. Henry had never been one for secrets. At least, I thought he wasn't. We'd spent 46 years together, through sickness and storms, through laughter and heartbreak. What could he possibly have hidden from me? Finally, I tore it open carefully, as though the paper might shatter. Inside was a single letter, handwritten in the same looping script. The first words made my chest tighten. My dearest Evelyn, if you are reading this, it means the time has come for truths that can no longer stay buried. Truths buried, my breath caught. I read on, my eyes scanning each line, as if time itself might erase the ink. I have lived my life beside you with love, but also with guilt. There are things I never told you, things I feared would destroy the life we built. Yet I cannot leave this world without setting you free from a lie that began long before you met me. My hands began to shake. I glanced toward our wedding photo on the dresser, Henry in his pressed suit, smiling with that dimple I used to kiss when no one was watching. What lie, what guilt? I read on, heart pounding. The truth is not about what I did, but about who I am and who you are. I felt my stomach drop, as if the floor had vanished beneath me. The words blurred for a moment, my eyes filling with tears. Evelyn, you were never meant to find out this way, but you deserve to know that the woman you have always called mother was not truly your mother. And your father, he was not the man you think. The letter slipped from my fingers. I sat there, frozen, the words echoing through my mind like a scream trapped in glass. Not my mother? Not my father? What was Henry saying? My parents were gone, buried decades ago in the family plot near the old Oak Hill. I had loved them, mourned them, carried their lessons like a compass through life. How could he, my husband, say such a thing? I forced myself to pick up the letter again. My pulse thudded in my ears. Your birth was not what it seemed. Your mother could not conceive, and your father made a desperate choice, one he thought was out of love. You were born to another woman, one your father knew only briefly. When the truth came to light, it was buried to protect you and to protect her. A sound escaped me, half gasp, half sob. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked around the room, the faded curtains, the framed photos of family holidays, of my children when they were small, and suddenly everything looked strange, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I know this will hurt you, my darling, but you have lived your life in a story that was never fully yours. I promised your father I would never speak of it, but after his death, I found her name and I met her. I stopped breathing. Met her? My husband had met the woman who gave birth to me? The woman I never knew existed? She wanted to tell you the truth herself, but you were already grown, already strong, already everything she could have hoped for. She chose to stay away for your peace, but she gave me something, and I kept it safe. If you are reading this letter, look beneath the cedar box. You will find a smaller envelope. That one will explain everything. I scrambled toward the cedar chest, my fingers fumbling as I pushed it aside. The floor beneath it creaked. I brushed away the dust, my heart hammering so violently I thought I might faint. And there, taped under the floorboard, was another envelope, smaller, sealed in wax. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I just sat there, clutching Henry's letter, my whole world tilting. My husband had hidden this. My parents had lied. My identity, my history, everything I'd believed for 72 years was now painted with a question mark. I wanted to scream. I wanted Henry back, to demand why he'd written this instead of telling me in life, why he'd looked into my eyes all those years, called me his bride forever, and still carried a secret so enormous. The rain outside turned into a storm. The wind howled against the window panes, rattling them like the universe itself was impatient for me to read what came next. I stared at the small envelope taped under the cedar box, its red wax seal cracked slightly with age. I could almost hear Henry's voice in my ear. If you are reading this, the time has come for truths. I reached for it, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I sat there, tears streaming down my cheeks, whispering to the empty room. Why now, Henry? Why after all this time? The clock ticked on the wall steady, relentless. I pressed the letter to my chest, inhaling the faint scent of cedar and dust, and I knew there was no going back. Whatever was in that second envelope would change everything, and part of me already feared I wasn't ready for what it would reveal. The storm outside deepened as I stared at the small envelope. The wax seal looked brittle, like one wrong move would shatter it to dust. I thought of Henry's hands, the same ones that once held mine through surgeries, funerals, and all those sleepless nights after our son left for college. Those same hands had hidden this envelope, carrying a truth too heavy for him to share. I finally peeled the wax open. Inside were two things, a short note and a small black and white photograph folded in half. The photograph came first. It was of a young woman standing beside an old truck on what looked like a dirt road. Her dress was plain, her smile faint but proud. The moment my eyes caught hers, something inside me shifted. I'd never seen her before, and yet something about her face tugged at me. The curve of her jaw, the eyes, my eyes. The note was in a different handwriting. Softer, more elegant, almost trembling. My darling Evelyn, if Henry has kept his word and you are reading this, then you are old enough now to face the truth I could never tell you. You were born on a cold night in February in a small clinic outside Maple Creek. I held you for only an hour. I named you Evelyn because it meant wished-for child. But you were never mine to keep. I pressed the paper to my lips. The ink was faint, but the pain in those words was alive. My chest tightened as I read on. Your father and his wife had been trying for years. I was young, foolish, and alone. He promised my child would have the life I could not give her, a real home, safety, love. I believed him. He said his wife would raise you as her own. But I never stopped loving you, not for a single day. My tears fell freely then. The woman's words blurred, bleeding into one another. She loved me. For 72 years I had lived thinking my mother's silence, her coldness at times, was just her nature. But now I wondered, did she know? Did she wake each morning fearing I might find out? I turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded ink, it said, "To my Evelyn from your real mother, Clara." Clara. The name meant nothing at first. Then, faintly, like a whisper through the years, I remembered an old family friend, a woman who used to visit once or twice when I was very small. She always brought candies wrapped in golden paper and smelled like lilacs. My mother had once said, "Clara used to work for your father's company." After that, she vanished. I sat on the floor, clutching the photo. Could it be that the woman who smiled at me, who once tied my hair with a ribbon when my mother wasn't looking, had been my real mother all along? The rain pounded harder, and the thunder rolled across the hills. I stood, trembling, and looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection stared back silver hair, wrinkled skin, and eyes that suddenly didn't feel like mine. Who was I? The woman in the photograph, or the daughter of the people who raised me in lies? I thought of Henry again. The letter said he met her. That meant he knew before he died. All those evenings we sat by the fire, and he'd hold my hand and tell me, "There's nothing in this world I wouldn't do for you." He was carrying this secret in silence. Why didn't he tell me when he was alive? Did he think I couldn't handle it? Or was he protecting me from something worse? The air felt heavy. The old house creaked like it was listening. I gathered the letters and photo, placing them gently on my nightstand, but my mind wouldn't rest. Clara's words wouldn't stop echoing. I found myself opening drawers, searching for anything, old papers, letters, records that could prove or disprove what I'd just learned. The night stretched long, and somewhere around midnight, in an old trunk beneath my bed, I found a folder marked with my father's initials, R.W. Inside were papers from his company, ledgers, and personal correspondence. Most of it was business, until one folded page slipped out a hospital record. Maple Creek Clinic. My name was written on it, but the mother's name was Clara Bennett. The room spun. My knees went weak. It was real. Not some cruel joke, not a misunderstanding. I was the child of another woman. I sank into bed, clutching the papers against my chest, and for the first time in my life, I felt like a stranger in my own skin. Every memory I had, every birthday, every photograph now carried a shadow. As dawn crept in, I found myself whispering the name Clara over and over. Who was she now? Was she even alive? Henry's letter said he met her after my father's death. That meant it couldn't have been too long ago. Maybe she'd left something behind. Maybe she'd wanted me to find her. The next morning, I made tea but couldn't drink it. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photo. The woman's eyes, my eyes, seemed to beg me to come find her. And suddenly, I knew what I had to do. I would go to Maple Creek. I would find that clinic, that dirt road, that truth that had been buried beneath decades of silence. Before leaving, I took Henry's letter, Clara's note, and the photograph, placing them in my purse like sacred relics. As I closed the door behind me, I whispered, "Henry, if this is your way of leading me to her, I'll follow." The air outside was cold and sharp, the way it used to be on winter mornings when I was a girl. The world looked the same, yet everything had changed. I didn't know what I would find in Maple Creek, but deep down, something told me this was only the beginning and that the real truth would be far darker than I could imagine. Maple Creek looked smaller than the stories I told myself on the drive there. The highway peeled away to a 2-lane road lined with maple trees that had already surrendered most of their leaves. Their bare branches reached over the asphalt like fingers, as if they'd been waiting for me. I parked across from what used to be the clinic, a single-story brick building, half sunk into its own shadow, windows boarded, the front steps slouching with rot. The sign that once read Maple Creek Family Medical had lost several letters. Now it just muttered M, Lay, Ray, Fa, Med. I stood in the cold and listened to the wind slide through the boards. The door was chained, but one of the back windows had a panel loose enough to pry. I hesitated, a grandmother testing the stubbornness of her own courage, then lifted the edge of the plywood and slipped inside. Dust took my breath, and a smell of mildew and old paper rose up like a ghost that had nowhere else to go. My shoes scuffed across linoleum that had long lost its shine, past a reception desk where a cracked bell waited for a ring that would never come. I didn't know what I was looking for, only that I would know it when it called to me. I kept my hand on the purse, where Henry's letter and Clara's note and the photograph lived like a small, pulsing heart. The rooms unfolded in a dim, greened light, the nurse's station with a toppled chair, the weighing scale leaning against a wall, exam rooms that still smelled faintly of antiseptic beneath the rot. A paper calendar remained tacked to a corkboard, its curled pages frozen in 1953, the year before I was born. Someone had circled February in red. My throat tightened. Down a hallway, a storage door resisted, then sighed open. Inside, metal filing cabinets slept with their mouths slightly open. I tugged at the first drawer. Stuck. The second gave a groan and slid. Folders wore labels that used to be tidy: A, B, C, D, E, F. My fingers shook as I reached for E. It felt like touching the tinder box of my own name. Records, loose pages, birth logs. I read slowly at first, then faster, fear and hope tripping over each other. Maple Creek wasn't a big town. The births listed per month were few. February my month, 4 names. One line was faint, nearly erased by time or intention. Female infant, 6 pounds 4 ounces. Mother, Clara Bennett. I pressed my palm over the typewritten letters, as if I could will warmth back into them. In the margin, a pencil note. Private C.R.W. My father's initials. I staggered back and caught myself on the cabinet. A sound creaked behind me in the corridor, and I turned so quickly the room spun. I expected a trespasser, a deputy, a scolding voice telling me to leave. Instead, a shape paused in the doorway, a woman, late 70s or early 80s, wrapped in a brown wool coat, a cane in one hand. Her white hair was bundled into a stern knot, but her eyes were bright and watchful. "You shouldn't be in here," she said, but the words carried more weariness than reprimand. "I was born here." I heard myself answer, "A long time ago." She studied me the way a gardener studies a plant that refuses to bloom. They shut this place down in 68, been falling apart ever since. Did you work here? My voice had that trembling softness I use with skittish birds. For a spell, she said, stepping into the storage room, the cane tapping an uneven rhythm. Nurse Bet. For 30 years. Bet Harrow now, though there's no one to say it but me. I swallowed. I'm Evelyn. Her eyes flicked to the open drawer, to the E-tab, to my shaking hands. "Ah," she said gently, "so the river's finally found its mouth." "What do you mean?" She sighed and leaned against the door frame. "Some stories take the long way home." She nodded toward the log. "Bennett, you found the line. I found more than a line." I steadied my voice. "A letter from my husband, a note from Clara. She said she named me and held me, then gave me away." Bet's mouth tightened with an old sorrow. Clara Bennett. She was just a girl, sweet as spring water. She came to us alone, and the men in suits came later. My chest prickled. Men in suits? She looked past me at a broken length of blinds that swayed in the draft. This was a respectable clinic, Mrs. Evelyn. But sometimes respectability is only a coat hung over a mess. There were arrangements, quiet ones. Dr. Lyle took care of them, and your father R.W. kept things clean on paper. Folks who couldn't have babies, and girls who couldn't keep them. Most of the time, it spared everyone a scandal. Sometimes, it spared a life. Other times, she trailed off, her face pinching with memory. Other times, "What?" I whispered. "Secrets rot." She tapped her cane once, as if punctuating a sentence. "Clara could have kept you. I told her so. But she kept saying there was a promise, that you'd have a father and a proper home." She wouldn't say his name. She just cried and held your little hat like it might take the place of your head. My fingers knotted into the strap of my purse. "Did you see my father? Did he come here? Not your daddy who raised you." Her eyes searched mine. The other one. A cold leaf of silence fell between us. There was another. Bet's gaze softened. You're old enough for the truth. She lifted the cane and pointed at the pencil note in the margin. Private C.R.W. R.W. wasn't the other. He was the fixer. But there was a man who came at night, 2 evenings before your birth. I wasn't meant to see, but I did. He stood in the hallway with Dr. Lyle and spoke in a voice that refused to remember gentleness. He paid cash. He wanted it quiet. She paused. He wore a ring with a crest I've only seen twice in my life. My breath stuttered. What crest? A stag with a crown. She frowned. Folks in the next county have a family like that. Old money. Your father, R.W., did work for them now and then. If he arranged it, he did so under that shadow. A slow dread opened in me, like a cellar door into dark. This man, the other, did he want me? He wanted you hidden. Bet's voice was almost kind, a hand laid on a fevered brow. And your father by paper wanted you saved. I didn't realize I was crying until the papers blurred. I lived my whole life believing I belonged to a story that loved me. Maybe the love was real and the story was not. Bet stepped closer. Both can be true. Love does not make a lie true, but it keeps a child warm while the truth wanders the cold. I wiped my cheek. Did Clara leave anything? Anything at all for me? She tried. Bet's eyes flicked to the far corner of the storage room where a low metal desk had collapsed onto one side. Dr. Lyle kept a lockbox for private things, letters, tokens, receipts no one wanted to file. When the clinic closed, a few of us packed what we could. Most of it went to the county archive. But Lyle kept a second stash. He had a habit of hiding delicate items where no one would think to pry. She aimed her cane at the desk's underside. There used to be a false panel there. My body moved before my doubts could stop it. I kneeled, pushed aside a curtain of cobwebs, and felt along the underside of the desk. At first, nothing. Then the edge of something that resisted, then yielded with a small, stubborn click. A thin compartment slid open like a sigh. Inside lay an old envelope sealed with dark wax and a tag looped through a fraying string. The tag was, handwritten in a neat, nervous hand, for E. The room went very quiet. Dust hovered in the air, sparkling as if the moment wanted a little theater. My heart struck twice, 3 times, hard enough to bruise. Would you like me to wait outside? Bet asked softly. No, I whispered. Please stay. I'm not sure I know how to stand on the floor of my own life. My fingers shook as I lifted the envelope. The wax crumbled beneath my thumb. Inside, a folded letter, a narrow key taped to the paper, and a small square of fabric, a baby's cap, the tiniest thing, embroidered with a single clumsy C. The letter trembled in my hands. I unfolded it and saw the careful loops of handwriting I'd now recognize in my sleep. My darling Evelyn, it began. I could not breathe. The walls seemed to lean closer, listening. Before my eyes found the next line, Bet touched the key with a knuckle. That's a deposit box key, she said. Old First County Bank used these before the merger. There's a branch still open on Pine Street. I blinked away the blur and nodded. The letter waited, patient as winter. I wanted to devour it and feared I would choke on it. "Read," Betta murmured, as if blessing me. "Then go where it points. You've come this far." I lifted the page to the light that limped through the boarded window and began to read, the small cap warm in my palm, as if, remembering the shape of a head it once kept safe. And in the first 2 lines I learned that love is a map drawn in fog, and that the person I had lost most in this world might not be the one whose name I had been mourning. The letter trembled in my hands as I read those first lines. "My darling Evelyn, if you are reading this, then the secret I carried has found you at last. I could not live with the weight of it forever, though I promised your father I would never tell. What I gave away that night was not only my child, but my voice, my name, and my truth. You were meant to live free of the shadow that destroyed so many of us. But if you have come this far, then you deserve the whole of it." I swallowed hard, my eyes scanning the rest as the world around me fell silent. Your father was a man of reputation, not kindness. He was powerful in ways that frightened people, including me. When I found out I was carrying his child, I begged him to help me. He said he would on one condition: the child must never bear his name. I was young, foolish, and believed his wife's tears when she said she would raise you as her own. But he lied to her, too. He told her you were from another woman, some stranger. He made her promise never to tell. That is how he built his peace. I stopped reading for a moment. My breath came in short bursts. My father, Robert Whitmore, the man whose portrait still hung in the town library, the man people called a pillar of integrity, was the monster in my mother's story. My hands shook as I read on. Henry came to me years later. He said you had grown into a kind woman, strong and bright. He said he loved you fiercely and would carry my secret until you were ready. I believed him. I saw the truth in his eyes. I gave him this letter and the key because one day I knew you would need to see what I could not say. The box at First County holds proof of everything: letters, contracts, and one photograph that will show you the face you have spent your life loving and hating without knowing. The letter ended with a line that pierced me like glass. "Find me if you can, my Evelyn. Or if I am gone, stand by my grave and forgive me for being too weak to fight for you." I pressed the paper against my chest and closed my eyes. The air in that room felt heavy, electric, like all the ghosts of Maple Creek were holding their breath. The key glinted faintly in my palm. Bet watched me quietly, her old eyes filled with something between pity and awe. "Do you know what you'll find in that box?" she asked. "I think I already do," I whispered. By the time I reached the car, the sun had begun to fall behind the pines, spilling red light through the branches. The drive to Pine Street was short, but every turn of the wheel felt like spinning deeper into a tunnel I couldn't reverse through. The bank sat on a quiet corner, its marble steps chipped with age. Inside, the scent of polish and paper filled the air. An old clerk with spectacles perched on the tip of his nose looked up as I approached. "I need to access a deposit box," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "Number 317. I found the key." He raised an eyebrow. "Name on the account?" Clara Bennett, I said softly. He adjusted his glasses and typed something into the computer. That box was last accessed nearly 30 years ago, but the key matches. If you're her heir, I can escort you to the vault. I nodded, my throat tight. The vault smelled like metal and cold stone. The clerk handed me a small tin box with fading engravings. My fingers hovered over the latch before finally opening it. Inside lay a folded stack of letters, a few photographs, and a leather-bound notebook tied with twine. On top of it all was another note in Clara's handwriting. Start with the notebook. The rest will make sense after. I untied the twine and opened the notebook. The first page was dated January 1953, a few weeks before my birth. Her handwriting was shaky, hurried, as if she had written each line in fear of being caught. He came tonight, he said. If I breathe a word, he will ruin me. He has a wife who cannot bear children, and he thinks this is some kind of gift from fate. But I am terrified. He said he would handle everything through Mr. Whitmore's company. I only know his first name, Richard. My heart stuttered. Richard. My father's name was Robert Whitmore. Then who was Richard? I turned the page. Robert's brother, Richard, has offered to help. He says he will speak to the clinic, make sure everything is handled properly. But when I look into his eyes, I see the same cold ambition that ruined his brother. The Whitmore men are alike in their power and their cruelty. A chill ran through me. My father had a brother, Richard, who disappeared from family history decades ago. My parents never spoke of him, except once when my father said he'd embarrassed the family and was better left forgotten. I read on. If they both knew, if they both were involved, then my child will never be safe. I must trust Henry. He is kind, and he said he would find me when it's over. He promised that the baby would be loved. Henry, my husband. My heart clenched as I whispered his name. So that was how they met. Henry wasn't just the man who loved me. He had been the bridge between my real mother and the lie that became my life. He must have known the Whitmores, worked with them somehow. That's why he'd carried this guilt all his life, why he'd kept silent. At the bottom of the box, beneath the letters, was a single photograph. It was black and white, crisp, formal two men in suits, shaking hands in front of the Maple Creek Clinic. My father, Robert, stood on the left, smiling. Beside him was another man, nearly identical but sharper featured, his smile tighter, eyes hidden behind dark glasses. The back of the photo read simply, R, W, and R, D. Whitmore, Maple Creek, February 1953. 2 brothers, 2 Whitmores, both tied to my birth, both complicit in the secret that defined me. The air in the vault grew thin, my knees weakened, and I gripped the box for balance. Henry had known, my father had lied, my mother had suffered, and all of it had been buried behind family pride and power. I gathered the contents carefully, placing them back inside. "Ma'am?" the clerk asked gently. "Are you all right?" I nodded faintly. "No," I whispered, "but I will be." Outside, dusk had deepened into indigo. The wind carried the faint scent of rain. I stood beneath the bank's old lamp-post, clutching the key and the photograph, and whispered to the night, "Henry, Clara, I'm following the trail. I'll finish what you started." The storm clouds gathered again over Maple Creek, but I didn't flinch. Somewhere out there, in the forgotten corners of that family's legacy, the truth waited and I would find it, even if it tore down everything I once called my name. The night after I found the box, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window of the small motel across from the Maple Creek courthouse, watching the rain streak down the glass like lines of memory dissolving into the dark. The letters, the notebook, the photograph, all spread out on the bed beside me felt like an army of ghosts closing in. I traced the faces in that photograph again and again. Robert and Richard Whitmore, my father and my uncle, the two men who had conspired to erase the truth of my life. What did they gain from it? Why take a woman's child and bury her under silence? By morning, I had made up my mind. There was only one Whitmore still alive, my cousin, Thomas, Robert's son. He still lived on the family estate, the same place I used to visit as a girl for Christmas dinners where everyone smiled too tightly and spoke too softly. I'd always found it odd how, despite being my cousin, Thomas never looked at me quite right, like I was something he recognized but couldn't name. I called him. My voice shook as I said, "It's Evelyn." A pause. Then, "Aunt Evelyn? My God, it's been years. Is everything all right?" "I need to see you," I said. "It's important. It's about your grandfather and your great-uncle Richard." Another pause. I could almost hear the old house breathing through the phone. "Come by this afternoon," he said finally. "We'll talk." The Whitmore estate sat on a hill just outside town, its driveway lined with oak trees that bent inward like sentinels. The house was exactly as I remembered, grand, stone, cold. The door creaked open. Before I could knock twice, Thomas stood there, taller than I recalled, with the same sharp Whitmore jaw. He smiled politely, though his eyes flicked briefly to the envelope in my hands. "You brought something." "Yes," I said. I brought the truth. We sat in the parlor, a room that had never changed portraits of the Whitmore men glaring down from the walls, the scent of lemon polish, and a fireplace that hadn't known warmth in years. Thomas poured me tea, then leaned back. "You mentioned my grandfather. That's quite a name to resurrect. I set the photograph between us. You should know who's standing next to him." He picked it up, his brow furrowed. "Richard, my great-uncle. My father said he left for Europe and died there." I leaned forward. "He didn't. He stayed here long enough to ruin the lives of 3 people, including mine." Thomas looked up sharply. "Yours?" I told him everything about the letters, the clinic, Clara Bennett, the notebook. I watched the color drain from his face as the story unfolded. When I finished, he exhaled slowly and said, "I always wondered why my father kept certain files locked away in the cellar. He said they were old business dealings. But once, when I was a boy, I opened one. I saw the name Bennett. He caught me and told me never to touch those papers again." "What kind of dealings?" I asked. "Land acquisitions, and something about arrangements." My stomach turned. Arrangements. That's the word Betty used too. Thomas stood and crossed the room to an old cabinet. He retrieved a small brass key and motioned for me to follow him. We descended into the cellar, a narrow hallway lined with shelves and the smell of dust and old wood. At the far end, he unlocked a chest and opened it. Inside were dozens of folders, each neatly labeled with dates and initials. He pulled one out and laid it on the work table. The name on the front read, Bennett, C. We opened it together. Inside were typed contracts, notarized documents, and a letter signed by R. D. Whitmore, my father's brother. This agreement ensures the safe placement of the child born to C. Bennett on the 2nd of February 1953, under the guardianship of R. Whitmore and his wife. All records are to be sealed and references destroyed. Compensation of $10,000 to be issued to the attending clinic and Dr. Lyle. My hands began to shake. $10,000, I whispered. They bought me. Thomas's face went pale. This isn't just adoption, Aunt Evelyn. This was a transaction. And your grandfather, my father, made sure it stayed buried, I said bitterly. There were more letters in the file. One, from Dr. Lyle to Robert Whitmore, read, Your brother insists we maintain absolute discretion. The girl will not live to see her child. It has been arranged. I froze. Not live to see her child? I whispered. What does that mean? Thomas leaned closer. They tried to kill her. The words struck me like thunder. My pulse roared in my ears. But she lived, I said. She wrote those letters. Maybe she escaped, he said. Or someone helped her, Henry. My heart seized. Henry must have been the one who saved her, who smuggled me out of whatever plan the Whitmores had. That's why he carried this guilt until his death. That's why he hid the letters, instead of destroying them. I turned to Thomas. Your grandfather and his brother, what happened to Richard? He frowned. Richard vanished the same year my grandfather suffered his heart attack. Rumor was he left the country, but he trailed off, opening another file. Inside was a small, faded newspaper clipping. Local businessman found dead in river. Identity confirmed as Richard Whitmore. The date matched the week I was born. We stared at each other. You think my father, he began. I nodded slowly. He killed his brother to protect the secret. Thomas sank into a chair. This family, it's like rot in the roots of a tree. No matter how much you trim, the sickness remains. I reached across the table, taking his hand. Then it ends here. We burn this rot out, once and for all. We packed the files, the contracts, the letters, everything into a single box. What will you do with it? Thomas asked. Tell the truth, I said simply. Clara deserves that. So does Henry. And so do I. As I turned to leave, Thomas stopped me. Aunt Evelyn, one more thing. He handed me a small envelope, yellowed with age. This was in my father's desk. I never knew what it meant. It's addressed to you. My name, Evelyn Whitmore, was written in my father's unmistakable hand. My breath caught. I opened it carefully. My dearest daughter, if the past ever reaches you, know that I never meant to hurt you. What I did out of fear. But the man you called husband knew everything from the beginning. He was not the rescuer, you think. He was part of it. He came to me first. He made the deal. The words blurred before my eyes. Henry, my Henry, the man who held my hand through every storm, the man who wrote me love letters until his dying breath. The man I thought saved me had been the one who arranged it all. The room spun. My knees buckled. Thomas caught me before I fell. He sold me, I whispered. He sold me and then spent a lifetime pretending to save me. Thunder cracked outside. Somewhere, the house groaned under the weight of its own sins. And in that instant, the final piece of my life's puzzle clicked into place, not as redemption, but as ruin. The letter from my father shook in my hands long after the thunder quieted. It was as though every heartbeat tried to deny what my eyes had just read. Henry, my Henry, the man whose laughter had once filled this house, whose arms had been my refuge, had been part of it all. He wasn't my savior. He was my captor, wrapped in tenderness. Thomas sat across from me, silent, afraid to speak. I could hear the storm dragging its nails against the windows, the air thick with the smell of wet earth. My whole life, every kiss, every memory, felt like an echo of someone else's script, written before I even knew I was alive. I folded the letter slowly, like I was laying a ghost to rest, and whispered, "I need to see her grave." Thomas nodded. "Maple Hill Cemetery. There's a Bennett plot near the old willow." The drive there was wordless. The storm had eased into a steady drizzle, the kind that blurs the world into watercolor. When I stepped out, the ground was slick, the grass whispering under my shoes. I followed the narrow path past weathered stones until I found it, Clara Bennett, 1932, 1999. The name was carved deep, the edges softened by rain and time. I knelt, brushing away the wet leaves that clung to her name. The cold seeped through my bones, but I didn't care. For the first time, I spoke aloud to the woman whose blood had built my heartbeat. "Clara," I said softly, "I'm sorry it took me 72 years to find you." The rain began again, heavier now, drumming against the umbrella Thomas held above me. I touched the earth, tracing her name as if it could answer me back. "You deserved better than their bargains," I whispered. "You deserved a child who knew your voice." A gust of wind tore through the trees, scattering petals from the wilted flowers at her grave. It felt almost like a response, a sigh, a release. I closed my eyes and let the tears fall freely, mixing with the rain until I couldn't tell them apart. When I finally stood, Thomas was holding out another envelope. "I found this in the box," he said. "It has Henry's handwriting." I hesitated before taking it. The ink had bled in places as if it had been written in tears. The first line gutted me. "My Evelyn, if you've found this, then the truth has already hurt you. I can only ask that you listen before you hate me." I held the paper tightly, my voice breaking as I read. "When I met Clara, I was not a husband or a savior. I was a broker for your father's arrangement. I was young, desperate, and drowning in debt. Robert paid me to handle the adoption quietly. I didn't know her, not then, but the day I saw her hold you, something in me changed. She looked at you like you were the only pure thing left in a world full of greed. When she begged me to protect you, I swore I would, even if it meant lying to her. The page trembled. Your father's brother was dangerous, and Clara was meant to disappear. I helped her escape before they could silence her. That was the first truth I ever told. The second is harder. I fell in love with you long before you knew who I was. I told myself I could make it right by giving you the life she wanted for you. I built a world on guilt and called it love. I stopped reading, my throat raw. My entire body trembled not from the cold, but from the flood of emotion I couldn't contain. I whispered, You lied, Henry. You lied, but you also saved me. Thomas looked down, his expression soft. Maybe he couldn't live with what he'd done. Maybe loving you was how he tried to undo it. The words settled over me like a bitter kind of mercy. I read the final line of Henry's letter. Forgive me, my love, for every silence, for every secret, for every night I watched you sleep and wished you never had to know what I had done to keep you safe. My knees gave out. I sat on the wet ground, clutching the letter to my chest, the paper soaking through my dress, the cemetery around me blurred, the world folding into the sound of rain and the faint scent of earth. When I could finally breathe again, I placed Henry's letter beside Clara's grave. You both loved me, I said. You just didn't know how to love without destroying yourselves first. The clouds began to part, the last of the rain glinting in the faint sunlight. It was then I noticed the tiniest thing, something poking out of the earth beside Clara's headstone. I brushed the soil away and found a rusted locket, its chain broken. When I pried it open, there was a tiny photograph inside. It was me, as a baby, in Clara's arms. Henry was beside her, looking down not as the man I married decades later, but as a stranger, haunted and young. They had known each other from the beginning, the three of us bound by the same tragedy, each trying to rewrite it in our own way. I held the locket tightly. Maybe love is never pure, I whispered. Maybe it's just the shape we give to our regrets. The drive back to town felt like closing a circle that had been open too long. Thomas dropped me at the motel, promising to handle the legal side, to expose the Whitmore archives, to bring the truth into light. He asked if I'd be all right. I don't know, I said. But for the first time, I'm not afraid to find out. That night, I sat again by the window. The storm had passed, leaving only a damp hush over the town. I placed the photograph, the letters, and the locket on the table before me. For a moment, I could almost hear them, Henry's deep laugh, Clara's soft lullaby, my father's heavy footsteps in the hall of memory. I spoke into the quiet. You've all had your secrets. Now they're mine to carry. The clock ticked softly, the candle flickered, and for the first time in my long life, I felt the weight of truth settle not as a burden but as a kind of peace. I wrote one last letter that night. It began simply, To whoever finds this, know that I lived a life built on lies, but ended it with the truth. The people who loved me were flawed and frightened, but real love, still lived in the cracks. I sealed it and tucked it behind the cedar box in my closet, the same place where it had all begun. A circle complete. When I finally turned off the light, I whispered into the darkness. Good night, Henry. Good night, Clara. I forgive you. Outside, the rain began again, not harsh this time, but soft and rhythmic, like applause from the heavens for a story finally told, and I, Evelyn Whitmore, closed my eyes not as the daughter of lies nor the wife of secrets, but as a woman who had finally, mercifully found her truth.